it's Jess. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. So today I wanted to talk about the 6 books that I read in November. It was, I think, a pretty good reading month for me. Let's talk about the books that I read. I wanted to start off with the book that I read on my Kindle, mainly so that I don't forget about it because I don't have a physical copy, and that was Lady of Shadows. This is the second book in this series, which I don't remember the name of the series. It is a fantasy romance series, and I would say that the romance is definitely a very significant part of the story. So in book 1, we meet our main character. Her name is Scarlet, and she is an assassin that has been trained her entire life, but something happened before the book started. Now she has kind of like isolated herself and sort of like removed herself from the Assassin's Guild, and she is living as a ward with this nobleman. The Assassin's Guild like very much wants to get her back, and then we're introduced to this new character who is, I want to say, like a general or like a trainer for like some of like the elite forces within this country's army. They meet and then things start happening. There's a much bigger like political thing going on. I know that's super vague, but there is a political thing. But yeah, there's a couple of big like reveals in book 1 that they were not surprising. I don't consider them to be like a true plot twist. It's more stuff that like the reader knows, and then it's like revealed to the characters in a super dramatic, satisfying way that causes like a bunch of mess and chaos. I love like a good dramatic reveal. Like I just love it when things are just a little bit too dramatic, a little bit messy. It's really entertaining for me as a reader, and I just like it when, you know, the characters are thrown into a little bit of chaos. And so basically these reveals that we find out in book 1 lead to what's going on in book 2. And in book 2, we're in a completely different location. Scarlet basically has had to like flee for her life along with a couple of her friends, but she's also like separated from some of her friends, and those friends are important. Book 2 is interesting because it's like a lot of world building and a lot of setup and a lot of character development, but plot-wise, it's kind of a nothing sandwich. I gave this book 3 stars. I gave the first one 4 stars. I was really interested to learn about the world. We learn a lot more about magic at this new location, because in book 1, at the location Scarlet's in, like you can't use magic. So once we move to book 2, we learn a lot more about magic. We learn a lot more about just the wide world in general, and there's a lot of world building which I find fascinating. And while in book 1 we had these like tiny little like hints teased, they weren't like really hints, like it was kind of obvious, but like we had like the seeds for what the plot is going to be, and a lot of those seeds get really solidified in this second book, and we can kind of see how the overall story is going to progress. This is a 5-book completed series, and I liked that. I liked seeing the different political parties move and interact and see how the power structure worked within the world. But I did have some issues. My first issue is that I personally don't really like books where like the primary plot is like the character training. Now here's the thing. I am nothing if not a complicated person, because if a character learns their abilities too quickly and it seems like they're just like naturally good at stuff without any training, I will be pissed. Because I don't like that. Like, I don't like my characters being just naturally good and gifted at everything. However, I also do not enjoy reading a training sequence. And that's like the primary plot of this book that isn't related to the political storyline. There's a lot that I can already see is happening in this series. I think it's going to be a great series that I really like. There's a lot that needs to happen by the end of it. I don't like training stuff. I know it needs to happen, but I don't personally enjoy it. The other thing that I'll say is that Scarlet is like very snarky, like, oh, I've got a quip for everything. And like, honestly, at a certain point, like, can you just have a normal conversation? It actually got really, really annoying that, like, no matter what was going on, she, like, had to have, like, some, like, sarcastic one-liner to, like, prove how, like, smart and clever she was. And I'm like, baby girl, can you just, like, just talk normal? Just have an actual conversation with people. And it does get frustrating because I also feel like the more jokes you put in, it's like, they don't hit, you know what I mean? Like when there's actually like a moment for a funny joke, they don't land the way they should because, you know, there's already been 5 on this page. It's like it got really, really excessive and kind of got annoying for me, so I did not love that. And then this book also had a lot of character development, and I felt that some, not all of it, I think there are like multiple changes specifically that Scarlet needs to go through, and some of the character development that Scarlet went through felt natural, and I liked basically all the character development of like the other characters. I didn't have any issues with them. It was just with Scarlet. I would say that some of her character development felt too quick. It's like she's been going on for like a book and a half and she's like, no, 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 no. But then she talks to like one character and she's like, oh, yes. Those are my issues with it. I mean, I understand that like me not liking a training type sequence, like that's just on me. It's just like an enjoyment thing. Like I totally get that it needs to happen. But yeah, the snark and the character development, like the snark should have been, in my opinion, dialed way back. And I think some of Scarlet's character development needed to be a more gradual change in order for it to feel like real, earned, actual character development. The other issue I had is that I don't mind characters having like a bit of chaos. I like chaotic characters. I like messy characters. I like gray characters. But what I do get annoyed with is when the character that we're in their head, when they like hide things from us. Not hide things from us like this is an unreliable narrator. I like unreliable narrators. That's fine. I'm talking about when the author chooses for the main character to hide something for the reader just to like try to add like a dramatic reveal later, when in reality I feel like the reader should have like known about the plan. I don't think I'm explaining this well, but like Sarah J Maas in Throne of Glass did this all the time, where like all of a sudden Aelin would just be like, oh yeah, by the way, I've been planning this for like a month and a half. Here it is. And it's like, okay, but if we were in Aelin's head this whole time, we should know that this is the plan. It made me feel like Scarlet was acting really recklessly and like really sporadic, not in like a fun way, not in a messy way, not in an entertaining way, just in a way that was like annoying to read about, because I could just tell that like the author was just purposely withholding information from us just so that it could be like dramatic later. But it ended up not being dramatic because I knew already what was going to happen, because like it's very obvious. It's not meant to be like a like gotcha gasping twist. It's just meant to be like dramatic and messy. But because I already knew what was going to happen, and because I was annoyed because I knew what was going to happen, but like I was still being withheld that information until like the dramatic reveal. When the dramatic reveal happened, I was mainly just annoyed. And it's funny because the same type of reveals happened in book 1, but in book 1, it wasn't Scarlet holding information back from the reader and holding information back from the other characters. It was the other characters holding information back from Scarlet. So the dramatic reveals hit a lot harder. They felt more real. They felt like it was so dramatic. It was juicy. It was like a freaking soap opera. I loved it. That being said, I gave this book 3 stars. I do plan to continue the series. I think the last 100 pages of this book were really, really great. Plus, I've seen enough of the plot that I think it's going to be like a really, really fun, entertaining book series. I will be continuing, but this one was not as good as book 1. Next up, I want to talk about City of Dragons by Robin Hobb. This is the third book in the Rainwild Chronicles, which is a 4-book series, and it is the 4th series within the Realm of the Elderling. I can't talk about this book. I cannot tell you the plot. I can't even talk about some of the characters without spoiling major things within this. So I will just say that this is a story about survival. It is a story about striking out on your own, finding your own identity, finding your own place within the world. It is a story about making new settlements and what rules do we impose on ourselves, what rules do we impose on each other. So far, I'm loving this. I love Robin Hobb. I really wish I could be more specific about this and tell you about like the actual plot, because in book 3 the plot got really good. Book 1 and 2 are like primarily a journey and survival story. It is a group of characters setting out. They don't know if they're gonna make it, they don't know if they're gonna live, they don't even know if what they're looking for is really there or not. So it's like a quest story. But in book 3, things are on one hand more stable, but on another hand a lot more wild. And so in book 3, I think we have much bigger plot, like some of the bigger threads start to come in this story. So I gave the first 2 books in the series 4 stars, love them. This is the first book in the series that I gave 5 stars. Characters are doing stuff, characters are changing, growing, some for the better, some for the worst. It's a really good time. Robin Hobb is unmatched in character work. I will never ever get enough of Robin Hobb's writing. I'll never get enough of her character work. And I also just really like the philosophical and moral and ethical discussions and conversations that are in here. I love this series, and I firmly think that if you are a fantasy reader, you need to check out Robin Hobb. Please check out the Farseer trilogy. Please give it a chance. I love it so much. Next up, I finally got around to reading Catching Fire. I started The Hunger Games for the first time as an adult in January. I read book 1, and in November I finally got around to reading book 2. So we're making great progress in this series. I don't think I really need to talk about this. This is like a super iconic book. It like changed the book industry. It's fantastic, and I basically had just never read these as an adult, and so I just, wanted to see, do they hold up when you have a fully developed frontal lobe? And the answer is yes. Yes, they do. As I'm talking about this book, by the way, I'm just going to assume that like you're familiar with the series and like potentially have read it and like you just understand everything I'm talking about. So I don't need to explain the plot. When I was younger, when I was a teen, I would say that this was my least favorite book in the series, mainly because I felt like, okay, we already had the Hunger Games, now we're in Catching Fire, and like this is just like the same book. And it's not that I didn't enjoy it. I still enjoyed it. And like I did understand that like to get from the Hunger Games to Mockingjay, that like this is how we get here and this is like what the plot is. And like, so when I was younger, when I was a teen, I understood the steps. But now that I'm reading this as an adult, truly picking up on so many things that I didn't as a teen, and like so many of the themes, how terrible Katniss and her PTSD is, and also like all just like the themes of capitalism and all of the things that were present in book 1. I like now understand why Susan Collins chose for this to be the way the plot goes, in order to act as a catalyst, but like also to highlight all of the themes that were in book 1 and like really reinforce them. And not only that, but like to expand on them, especially about like the themes of capitalism and oppression and censorship and manipulation. When I was younger, I may have thought that it was like a little bit of the same, but now I really truly see how different they are. I think Suzanne Collins is just an absolutely fantastic author. I gave this 5 stars. I loved it. It was also like heartbreaking. Every single thing that I thought negative about this when I was a teenager, I was wrong. And actually, Suzanne Collins is perfect. And this is a fantastic book. Yeah, no notes. Amazing. Next up, I read House of Lies and Sorrow. This is Fae of Rewith. whatever. Book one, it doesn't matter. I gave this 2 stars. It's boring. I don't recommend it. I found this, and I mean also more books, but like this and the next book that I'm going to talk about. When I was at my sister's, I went to the used bookstore there, and they're fantastic. They have such a good selection and such a good like policy for store credit. But I got this for like $1.50, and that's about like how much entertainment I got out of it. I don't think this is good. I think that this is like honestly super generic. It's, you know, human girl is getting married off to a fae prince, and he's evil and he kills people and blah blah blah. It was really, really boring and really generic, and none of the characters stood out to me. None of them seemed well-rounded. The plot was super, super generic. None of the like reveals at the end were interesting enough to like even make me consider reading book 2. But again, for $1.50, I mean, I got my money's worth for it. 2 stars, I do not recommend this series. Next up, I read Radiance by Grace Draven, and this was actually at that same used bookstore, and it was sitting right next to that other book. I've been seeing Grace Draven as an author like going around, but I've never checked out anything by her, and I'm not gonna lie, I thought that this was a different book. Like, I thought that I was actually getting Entreat Me, but I just like got them confused. But Grace Draven is really, really popular within the fantasy romance like subgenre, and after reading this book, I can see why. This book was so sweet and cute and funny. So this is a book that is like a romance first. 80% of this story is like the romance, and then like 20% of it is like an actual plot. You read this because you want to read a romance that's set in a fantasy world. So in this book, you're following these 2 people, the people on the cover. The woman is the king's sister's daughter. So she is like sort of royalty, but she's also like not within the royal actual line, so she's kind of like expendable but still important. And then the love interest is this dude who's not human, and I forget what they are called, but they're like not human. So I suppose this is like technically a monster romance. He's still like 95% human. He's just technically not. So basically the 2 of them get put in a political marriage for alliance purposes. And it's funny because both of them, by like their own people, are considered like amazing, like epic, beautiful, like perfection, like godlike levels of beauty. But when they look at each other, they're both disgusted by each other, at least like physically. He looks at her and he's like, "You are so ugly," because she's like a human and like her skin is like white, but like, you know, like humans, like we have like blood vessels, so we kind of have like a rosy, like a pinkish undertone. He like compares her to like fish and like shellfish, and he's like, "Ugh, she's so ugly." And like he has like gray skin, so like she's like, he looks like a corpse. So it's really funny because they're in this political alliance marriage, and they're married to each other, and they're both just like disgusted visually with the other person, but like they're also really like genuine good people, and both of them kind of expected that they would be in a political marriage due to like their station and like where they are like in nobility and stuff. So they had prepared for this. They talk to each other and they're like, let's just be honest, let's just be friends with each other. And they both agree to that. Because they're different species, they can't have children, so there's not really physical pressure on the relationship either. And it's just really, really funny. There's a lot of like silly moments within this book. There's a lot of humor in this book, and it's just the 2 of them agreeing to be friends and then learning about each other and falling in love. And it's really, really sweet. It's just a really adorable, healthy, warm hug of a romance novel. and I really like it, and I definitely 100% will be reading more by Grace Draven. And then the last book that I wanted to talk about, the last book that I read, is The Teller of Small Fortunes. This book is so great. I know everyone has been talking and reading about this book lately. This is a brand new release. I got it in my book of the month, and it was just so cute and warm and just a little bit whimsical. To be honest, the whimsy could have been turned up, but I'm one of those readers that, like, I love all of the whimsical things. Like, you can't have too much whimsy for me, so it was probably just enough whimsical for the average reader. In this book, you follow Tao, and she is a fortune teller, and she lives in her cart with her donkey, and basically she travels from town to town and she tells small fortunes. For example, she might tell you, hey, next week when you're baking bread, you're gonna burn your hand, so either try to not burn your hand or make sure that you have like healing stuff on site so that you can take care of it, things like that. And it is just her on the road, and she just basically moves from town to town selling these small fortunes. And like, you as the reader know immediately like that these fortunes definitely are true, and you also kind of learn immediately that there is more to Tao than she is showing the world. Tao is on the road, and there is a tree blocking the path, and these two travelers come from the other direction, and at first she thinks that she's like about to be held up by highwaymen and robbed, but it turns out that like they're actually just travelers, but one of them is like an ex-mercenary and the other is an ex-thief. They help to clear the road so that Tao can move forward, and to thank them, she offers to read their fortune, and she actually only ends up reading one of them. She reads the ex-mercenary's fortune, and what she sees in it, and she tells him that he is going to give his daughter a kitten, and the daughter is going to name the kitten after this pirate, and she thinks like, oh, I did a good like fortune, that's a really cute little story, whatever. But she actually finds out that the man's daughter is missing, and the reason him and this ex-thief are on the road traveling is that they are trying to track her down, and they're very suspicious at first, assuming that she is like a con woman or something like that. And so they decide that they're gonna follow her and see if like she can tell true fortunes. From there, the story ends up basically being them trying to track down this man's daughter, and along the way they also get another traveling companion, this woman who's a baker, but like she bakes things that are like delicious taste wise, but like visually look like they've been sat on, so it's really funny. There's definitely like quite a bit of humor in this as well. It's a really good time. The four of them are on the road. Now I will say that this book is like a little meandering. The characters are following clues to find this man's daughter, but they don't necessarily have any like hard evidence. They don't necessarily have like a for sure path to get to her, so they're going from town to town just trying their best. And I personally have side quest mentality. I love meandering around. I love it. Blame The Hobbit. You know, I read that in my formative years, and that's a meandering story, and now I love them. I could definitely understand how the meandering nature of this could be a turnoff for some readers. That is something that like I actually enjoy in books. I like it when we're going all over the place. I enjoy that. But yeah, it's the story of the four of them. As the story goes on, you get to know Tao better, and you get to learn about her backstory. Her and her mother immigrated to this country when she was 5, and she very much is dealing with some prejudice throughout her travels. She misses her home country, but she also, you know, loves the country that she's living in now, so she has a lot of issues with her identity as well. I think that this story will also just really appeal to anyone who has experienced loneliness. I think that this is a story for anybody who needs a warm, soft story with found family in it. Tao deals a lot with loneliness because, like I said at the beginning of this book, she is traveling by herself. And as I mentioned, she has to deal with prejudice sometimes in these like small villages that she's going through. There's a lot of character development in here. Tao changes, but like also, so like the 4 characters she's with, the ex-mercenary is like middle-aged. He doesn't necessarily change. He just like wants to find his daughter. But the ex-thief and the baker and Tao, they're all of age, and all of them go through like their own personal development and their own changes. It felt really real and earned. I just loved seeing Tao warm up to these people. I loved learning about her past. I loved learning why she is the way she is. And it's just really, really sweet and beautiful. I would say that like the only issue I had with this book, and it's not an issue, it's just like a creative choice. And I do think that it is really common within this subgenre of like sort of like cozy soft fantasy, where sometimes things get solved in a way that is like a little bit too on the nose, a little bit too easy. And I did feel that in this. Things were just like a little bit too like pat picture perfect a couple of times. It is purely just a product of this being like a soft cozy story. You know, like we don't want people dying in soft cozy stories, you know, like we want a happily ever after. That's why we go and we read these stories. And it is a common, I guess, complaint that I have within the genre. I don't know, like you can't even really, like it's not even real criticism, but that is literally the only thing that dimmed my enjoyment at all. And like I don't even want to say like dimmed my enjoyment,